Is the Trump administration still backing Israel's plan to annex parts of Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank? New York Times bestselling author and Middle East analyst Joel Rosenberg is raising that question after a speech by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And Joel joins us now by Skype to talk about it. Joel, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Wendy. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, Joel, what leads you to believe annexation might not be on the administration's agenda right now?
Well, it's been a little bit back and forth from the beginning. The Trump peace plan, which is actually a very creative, compassionate, fascinating, the most detailed peace plan that any administration has ever laid out. But from the beginning, there were questions, right? Was Netanyahu being given the green light to annex, or more properly, I think it would be the best way to say to incorporate peacefully and legally into the state of Israel up to 30% of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, into Israel proper. Was that going to be allowed at the beginning? Is it allowed later? What was interesting is, after being the #1 story in Israel for months, will the U.S. give the green light or not? Suddenly, nobody in Israel is talking about it. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was just giving a speech out in Iowa to more than 700 evangelical Christians who were in the room. I was there with him personally, and more than 300 other evangelical leaders all over the 50 states in the United States. He didn't bring it up at all. Not a single activist brought it up. Even in a private dinner we had with him later, it didn't come up. So it suggests that maybe this is the wrong moment to really have that type of conversation.
Yeah, well, as you know, and you live in Israel, they have an ongoing problem with terrorism. What impact will this have on Israel's ability to follow through in bringing terrorists under control if this does go through?
Well, okay, at the moment, things are quite quiet. Fairly quiet on the terrorist front. It's not that the Israeli military and intelligence forces, security forces aren't capturing would-be terrorists in their plans, but we haven't really had much problem of actual terrorist attack, mostly for the last couple of years. This could create a new wave of terror, which is why some of us, myself included, think, look, I'm for Israel peacefully incorporating more and more of the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria over time. But right now, I don't think it's a good idea. Not before the elections, not before we know whether President Trump is in fact going to be around for the next 4 years to give Israel some cover. But even from Israel's perspective, we're seeing a huge spike again in COVID cases, and the economy is nearly shut down. 1 out of 4 Israelis are out of work. So that seems maybe not the best time to add a whole new international complicator and possibly an incentive for terrorists.
Joel, do you think the Trump administration is perhaps cooling a bit towards Israel right now?
Not towards Israel. No. In fact, I would argue that standing with Israel as strongly as the Trump team has would mean don't add a new element in the U.S.-Israeli relationship between now and November, right? I actually think it's pro-Israel to just let Israel work its way through COVID and through the economic challenges and keep working on trying to open up peace opportunities with the Gulf states. Don't add a new controversial complicator into that equation. I think that is the most pro-Israel position, though I realize not everybody agrees with me.
Well, a lot of us do. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is, of course, an evangelical. Has he shared much about how his faith shapes his view of Israel and his work with you?
He did, and he has, and he did with the conference in Iowa last Friday. It was very, very interesting, right? I actually am not aware of any other conferences, certainly not of 1,000 people or more, happening of any kind in the United States right now. So for 700 evangelicals to meet in person, 300 more online, that was very interesting. That Secretary of State Pompeo, the Secretary of State, mind you, right, mostly focused on foreign affairs, took the time to come to this conference in the middle of COVID, in the middle of the heartland, to just share what's going on in U.S. foreign policy. And it wasn't just about Israel and the Middle East, though that was a big part of his speech, very interestingly. But it was also about China, human rights, religious freedom, and several other major Russia and major foreign policy issues, national security issues. But yeah, he is a man of faith. His wife, who's a strong evangelical Christian, Susan, she introduced him. That was interesting. They talked about their life pre-Washington of teaching fifth grade Sunday school at their church back in Kansas, where they're both from, and how Bible study and the scriptural and a biblical worldview informs how Pompeo does his job. I mean, he has a great compassion and understanding of people who have different faiths and no faith. But evangelical Christianity is what drives his faith, and it was very interesting to. I don't know if I've heard him as open as he was there, though he's certainly been open in other contexts too.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Joel, in your blog, you said there's some speculation among evangelicals about Secretary Pompeo's future plans. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, and the secretary I think is a little, I don't know, sensitive, but I think he's dismissing any talk of, why go to Iowa right now? But if you're an Iowa Christian conservative and you see a Secretary of State, a major player, as effective as he is, one of the big kahunas, let's say, of the future of the Republican Party, coming to Iowa in the middle of the summer, when nobody else is, it was not surprising to have heard a lot of buzz. He must be planning, he must be thinking at least how to lay the groundwork for a possible presidential run in the future. But, there's so many variables right now. Remember, there's also a big Senate race going on in Iowa right now. My friend, Senator Joni Ernst, the Republican there, is underwater. She's a couple points behind her very liberal Democrat rival. And so it wasn't surprising to see a major Trump administration official be in the state, say nice things about her, and so forth. So, but we're not, Wendy, normally we might be seeing lots of Republican future contenders coming into those early, key states. But I think Pompeo is the only one that I know of who's done that so far. Well, Pence, obviously the vice president, has been there.
Yes, indeed. Well, very interesting thoughts, and people should check out your blog. Joel Rosenberg, we always appreciate your insights. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Wendy. Great to be with you.